morning. Welcome to New York City VOAD's November general meeting. My name is Zach Hodson. I'm with the Salvation Army, and I also get the privilege of co-chairing the board of directors of VOAD with Racine from City Harvest. I'm not going to say much this morning. November, as you may know, is National Homelessness Awareness Month. And so we've gathered a conversation of folks who know far more about that than I. And the conversation will be led by one of our board members, Richard Vernon. Some may remember Richard from a checkered past in Sandy recovery. But he's now the executive director of Shower Power, a great organization providing hygiene access and advocacy for folks living on the street. So I will turn it right over to him.
Thanks, I think. Checkered past. I used to like Zach, and I've had the joy of working with him on many things over many years. We have a handful of subject matter experts with us this morning, from folks that are doing very much direct work with people who are currently homeless on the streets of our city, through policy experts in various aspects of the systems that are intended to get people off our streets and into housing, and as we will find out in some detail, often have more or less the opposite result. And we're going to specifically as well be looking at what effect the migrant crisis is having on the picture of homelessness in New York. So I'm going to get everyone to introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with one of Shower Power's board members and a friend for several years now, Deborah Berkman.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate that lovely introduction. I'm Deb Berkman. I work at NYLAG, or New York Legal Assistance Group, which is a free legal services provider. And what I specifically do there is I work with people experiencing homelessness and financial insecurity, and I try to advocate for people to get placements that are appropriate to their needs, and also to work on their cash public assistance and their food stamp cases. I just want to very briefly say that I know that we are here to talk about the new immigrants. When we talk about them, at least at NYLAG, we talk about them not as migrants, but as new immigrants, because migrants really connotes sort of a passing through. And this group of immigrants is just like every other group of immigrants that have come, and they are here to stay. And thus, they are immigrants. Thank you.
Josiah, would you like to go next?
Sure.
And then we'll have Jamie and close out with Josh before we move into guided discussion. Thank you.
Absolutely. Hello, everybody. My name is Josiah. I have the great privilege of leading an organization called City Relief. We do pop-up homeless resource centers in Manhattan mostly, but also in the South Bronx, and also in Newark, New Jersey, and Paterson, New Jersey. We try to create safe spaces for people to access emergency supplies like a hot meal, toiletries, socks, essentials. But then we also try to leverage community partners like Deb and Jamie and the other folks, and Josh and really everybody else who's on this call, to try to leverage the power of collaboration and community to get our friends in the street connected. So it's a real joy to be with you this morning.
Thank you. Jamie?
Yeah, good morning. I'm Jamie Powlovich. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of the Coalition for Homeless Youth, and we're a statewide advocacy agency that advocates for the needs of young people experiencing homelessness or those who have run away. So young people that are experiencing homelessness outside of a larger family composition. And so for New York City, primarily talking about young people under the age of 25 that are in the youth shelters, drop-in centers, or living on the streets. Thank you for having me. And I'll pass it to Josh.
Hi, everyone. I'm Josh Goldfein. I'm a staff attorney at Legal Aid's Homeless Rights Project. I use he, him pronouns. We are counsel to Coalition for the Homeless, and which means that we represent them in the right to shelter cases. And we also operate a hotline and do individual cases too, and spend a lot of time again, relying on the expertise and the work of all of you, and particularly the people on this panel.
Okay, thank you. So new immigrants who have arrived in unusual numbers and under previously non-happening circumstances. That put that very clumsily. So can we talk about a little bit about the busing that began a while ago and what's happening now? Just, you can unmute yourselves, my dear panel, and talk amongst yourselves.
I can talk about, I'm sorry, Josh, did you want to?
Go ahead.
I can just talk about my experience when I first started seeing sort of this group of immigration, this wave of immigration, and it wasn't from buses. I will say that when people first started coming to the city, it was, they were actually, some people were coming on buses, but a lot of people were put on planes by social services organizations in Texas, and they were being sent here. And so the buses, and even when Mayor Adams started talking about the buses, a lot of my clients weren't coming here on chartered buses from Texas. They were still coming here on Greyhounds and on planes. And it wasn't sort of a concentrated effort by the state of Texas as much as social services workers. That happened eventually, but it really started happening in, I started seeing it in April of 2022. Sorry, Josh, I just wanted to start with that.
Yeah, that's I agree completely. I was just going to say that even now, the majority of people are coming by air. There are people coming by bus on regular commercial buses, and also, of course, the buses that are periodically chartered by governments, both the state and local governments, including cities that are run by Democrats. It's not just Greg Abbott along the southern border, and not just Texas. It's also Arizona, and I think we had some from New Mexico at one point. And when it started, the majority of people, it seemed like, were from Venezuela. There were people from Colombia and Ecuador as well, but now we are seeing people from all over the world, every continent. There are paths that people travel to get to Central America, and then come to the southern border and cross the same way that people have always crossed.
Can we have a sense of numbers and how the numbers have ebbed and flowed?
The numbers are really what is driving the city's response. Currently, they're a little lower than where they were. We actually had what might have been the peak week a couple weeks ago, when there were 4,200 people who came in 1 week. We're still at thousands of people arriving every week, but not as many as that. There have, the people are focused on the numbers of people crossing the southern border itself, which is a major factor in how many people arrive in New York City. But even when the number of people crossing the border dropped, the number of people arriving in New York did not drop in the same way. So there's some internal travel within the United States for people who arrived, in the time frame that Deb was talking about, like since last spring, basically, a year and a half ago. But a lot of people end up coming to New York after trying to make a go of it somewhere else, and vice versa. A lot of people are leaving New York and going to other places.
And I guess the question is also, when we're talking about numbers, like, do you want are we talking about the number of people experiencing homelessness who are recent immigrants? Or are we just talking about the number of recent immigrants? And also important to think about when we're thinking about these issues, is the problem for New York City the number of people coming, or is it the number of people coming needing services?
I mean, I think from our point of view as organizations engaged in disaster work, it's to do with how we're seeing, or as a network, our workloads change and increased types of needs that we're encountering, how much that is doing to our capacity to meet a sudden disaster, because clearly this is a disaster in its own right. What do we do if there's a huge blizzard soon, or an enormous heat wave, or another hurricane, or all those kinds of things, on top of this enormous additional number of people who already are needing assistance just to get by, to find a place, all of those things, and how strained and creaky the systems seem to be already. So that I don't know if that's as helpful as I meant it to be, but I would quite like at this point to ask Josiah what he's seeing at City Relief in terms of any changes in needs, demographics, and just the volume of humans coming to City Relief's pop-up outreaches, hoping for something. And what are they hoping for?
Yeah, so what we're seeing, so the numbers overall in terms of what we're seeing are actually a little bit down from where they were last year at this time, but there's the dynamic of being able to help people effectively, and I think being able to help them navigate what resources are available to them. So most of the people that I've talked to over the last couple of weeks are asking for the same thing that the people before them, like over the last couple of months, have been asking for, which is work. People are looking for opportunities to work. I met with a guy from Senegal who'd been here about a month, who didn't speak any English. I spoke only French, and so there's also like a language barrier, reality in terms of being able to communicate with people and help them navigate the resources that are available. And aside from just putting a poster on a door with like a couple sentences in multiple languages, but are there actually people who can explain whatever process has been cobbled together to help these folks access services in a way that is dignifying and humanizing and meets them where they are, and speaks their language. And so that's what we're trying to navigate. The other thing we're trying to navigate is, again, just sort of what feels like it feels like we're like the people that we're trying to get connected, the services are just, because of the nature of access and where people are going to get what help, and because help is seems to be changing some days and then closing up another, or moving to different locations or whatever, it's which I know is a consequence of I would assume is a consequence of the volume, if I'm going to give an optimistic perspective rather than a malicious attempt to stall. And but there is the frustration of not knowing where to go for what, and where to, if I was sent here and then I was told about this. And so there's a lot of even word of mouth too among this population, where people are talking and giving each other oh, this is the latest. And so we're seeing a lot kind of this flow of folks who are struggling just to access the basics. So I would say that's an ongoing, the peak, like I said, the numbers we're seeing in the streets have been very high, and they haven't really gone down, but they're not, we're not seeing the spike that we saw a year ago. We're seeing sort of a flat spiked, and now it's sort of just steady. But the steady is, again, if you have nowhere to put, it's kind of like a cup of water. If you just keep pouring water at the same pace you always do, once the cup is full, the water just, eventually can't be contained in the cup. So it's been frustrating for a lot of folks who are just trying to find the resources that they need, and especially with winter coming, winter clothing. We saw one family with young children. We give out Bombas socks at our outreaches always, and we saw a couple kids who took the Bombas socks and used them as gloves because it was cold out and they had no access to gloves. And so we're giving out socks to people because we have that in surplus. And we're seeing children actually need to literally put socks on their hands to stay warm. So it's a real issue, and it's affecting real families, and again, minors. We're seeing children who are being impacted directly, which is relatively, again, for our work, we have historically always seen a vast majority of adults, which we still see more adults than kids, but we're seeing more kids than we've ever seen in the past.
Yeah, and I think for young people, I think one of the things to name in New York City is that the runaway and homeless youth shelter and drop-in services typically see a little under 30,000 young people a year across services. But out of those, it's primarily the numbers are happening at the drop-in centers across the 5 boroughs, because there's only a little more than 800 beds specifically for homeless young people and homeless young parents. And so since the influx has happened, started about a year and a half ago, the youth system doesn't expand, right? There is no right to shelter, youth specific shelter in the youth system, only in DHS. And so it's been a huge strain. And I think that our approach is that it doesn't matter if someone's coming here from California, the Bronx, right, or from another country. If they're homeless, they're homeless. And so that's how we've been trying to approach the need. And I think where the biggest issue is, as others have named, is that the systems, meaning government, right, those in power and have the ability to change things, aren't being as flexible with meeting that need. And so I think, especially as others have said, as we come into the cold months, seeing more people outside, seeing more young people outside. And I think that it's also really heightened what's always existed, and that's system silos, right? The government itself has their own silos within the various city agencies, but then there's also really stark silos between nonprofits, right? Grassroots organizations that are really doing this on the ground, many of us, and then government. And I think that that's where we're missing a lot of opportunities to meet the needs of individuals. There's amazing work happening on the ground. And I think because there's not stronger collaboration between what government's doing and what folks on the ground are doing, people are confused. They're not getting the right information. As others have named, information is changing very frequently, and folks are being harmed. And so I guess regarding numbers, I think, unfortunately, I don't want to get too much into it, but I think for young people, we won't ever know the numbers because it's never been tracked since this started, which is unfortunate from a data standpoint. But what we do know is, there is hundreds of unaccompanied newly arrived immigrant young people that are waiting for beds, that are on the street or in other community resources that aren't stable and aren't permanent, because we don't have the resources to serve them all.
Thank you. Josh, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
No, and I think we see that this is not a monolithic population. The new arrivals are, the families have very different needs than the single adults. Within those groups, there are people who have come here for very distinct reasons. It's, as with any large group of people, there's all kinds of different needs. one thing that we didn't expect when this started, for instance, was that there would be such a significant percentage of LGBTQ plus individuals in this group. That wasn't where our heads were at, and we quickly learned that that is a major driver of this wave of immigration, for instance. So there are people who are just looking for work, and they want to be connected as quickly as possible to a job, and they're out of here. And there are families with children, some of whom have disabilities or have language access issues that are more complicated than others, and some of whom just they get enrolled in school and now they're off to the races. It's required. The city is finally catching on to the fact that they have to do real case management, sit down with people, find out what their individual needs are, and that's going to be the key to helping people move on to the next step of their lives and get stable and not have to stay in these places that the city's putting them in.
Do you have a sense of what is driving that unexpected surge of folks identifying as LGBTQ plus?
I think people just couldn't be who they are where they were in their home country, and for a lot of people there were not a lot of places in between here and there where they felt comfortable. And and when for that subset in particular, a lot of people are crossing the border and they don't know where they're going, and they don't they don't have a connection to anywhere in the United States. They don't, there's not a particular place that they're thinking of. And many people are coming to New York because they're being told at the border, you're going to go to New York. But I think there is another group of people, including these folks, who very clearly feel like they need to be in New York. And so, right now, the mayor is very focused on the idea that people are being drawn to New York because there is a right to shelter. And if we do away with the right to shelter, which is what they're trying to do, then people will stop coming to New York. And I think that's wrong for a lot of reasons. But one reason is there are people in this world who think of themselves as New Yorkers, and they are coming to New York no matter what.
Thank you. Because I see Deb's itching to speak, but no. We're going to move into a Q&A for everybody in a couple of minutes, but maybe we could address a little bit what the right to shelter means and what ending it might mean. I realize that since it hasn't ended, it's somewhat speculation, but it would be very informed speculation. So what is the right to shelter really on the ground and policy level, and what would ending it do?
I think it means different things to different people. The history is that there was a case that was filed in 1979 on behalf of single adult men who were living on the streets of New York. And that case was settled by the city. The city agreed that there is a right to shelter for, at the time, just for single adult men, but very quickly, we added in women to that equation. So single adults have had a right to shelter for decades in New York. And what that means is that if people don't have another place to go, the city has to give them a bed. Now, the details of that have been expanded over time to include, what the standards are for that. I mean, some of the original, requirements of what a shelter is supposed to look like are in that very first settlement agreement. But on top of that, the state has added regulations since then. The city council has passed local laws. The state and the city have settled other lawsuits that require them to do things in a certain way. So for, particularly for the New York City Department of Homeless Services, there's a pretty robust set of requirements of what a shelter is supposed to look like. There are other agencies that have operated shelters, that continue to operate shelters besides DHS, to serve particular populations. And they also have their own rules that govern what those shelters are supposed to look like. And then what we saw, starting last year with so many people arriving in New York was that the city said, they wanted to set up yet another shelter system, particularly to serve this group. And so they have, reinvented the wheel yet again, and they don't have so many rules, but they're starting to be sort of, we could make you a list of what those places are supposed to look like. Referring back to what I said earlier, that the mayor seems to believe that people are coming to New York because they understand that there is a right to shelter. I think what he's talking about is, in particular, that you're going to get a bed. If you have nowhere else to go, you're going to get a bed. And that is what he is seeking to undo. And that would not just mean that he's seeking to undo the whole court order. It wouldn't just apply to the new arrivals. He is looking for permission to say, we don't have to shelter anybody unless they are eligible for public assistance, cash public assistance benefits, basically, which is a very narrow segment of who is in shelter today. And if they were successful, if the city were successful in that effort, we would see New York would start to look like, if you've been to any other major city in the United States, if you've been to San Francisco or Los Angeles or Portland or Denver, you see thousands of people living on the street, including families with children, living in tents, living under highway overpasses, living wherever they can. And, certainly in New York, we are used to seeing people on the street. We're used to seeing the NYPD go after encampments. These are certainly a feature of our life every day. But I think what we're talking about, it would be a whole other order of magnitude, particularly for these new arrivals who, have no other resource. They're not connected in any way to any other community, as I said, at least a lot of them when they arrive. Deb was referring earlier to, are you counting the people, everybody who's coming, or just the people who are seeking shelter? Because there are a lot of people who do have connections and they do, connect with their family and their communities. But there are a lot of people who don't have that tie, and they're coming anyway. So, we would see all those folks out on the street, in the parks, in subways, wherever people can be without, being rousted for however long they could stay there. And I don't think anyone wants to live in that version of New York.
I don't.
Yeah, no, I don't either. If I could just add a few things, it just, when we talk about not only the new arrivals, but everyone else also, it sort of makes it seem as if there is like the new arrivals are different than other people experiencing homelessness. And I don't necessarily know that that's the case. I mean, I think certainly some people come because they didn't really know where to go, or they were put on a bus. But most people come to New York because, for all of the reasons that everybody wants to live in New York, including probably everyone on this call. And and I think that the city has made a real effort to sort of like otherize this sort of new wave of immigrants, and saying like, well, because of them, our system can't handle it. And then, we're doing this, for them. But the truth is that, if the new arrivals aren't getting shelter, or don't get shelter, or any laws that are made about the new arrivals getting shelter, then there is no right to shelter, right? Because it has to be for everyone. Everyone has to get shelter. And so I think what Josh and Legal Aid are fighting for right now, it's the entire system. And as he said before, it is not, it's not looking at new arrivals not getting shelter. It's looking at elderly people not getting shelter. It's looking at, people who have been in the shelter system for a very long time and can't manage on their own, them not getting shelter. And I will say that I already have clients who have spent nights without beds, and they are new arrivals.
Can I ask a question to Josh and Jamie and Deb? Because this has been something no, we're not Q&A, and I'm supposed to be maybe answering questions, not asking them, but I have a question.
Go for it. It's a moderated conversation still for the next minute and a half or something.
Thank you. I'm I have theorized that the numbers of people who are experiencing homelessness in New York City who are not new arrivals is going up as well. I think again, this is the thesis. I've been trying to get the numbers and decipher which is which and which bucket counts as which bucket. But one of my concerns is that as the mayor and others are talking about newly arrived immigrants, sort of as the face of homelessness, as sort of the reason why the right to shelter needs to be sort of rethought, and but they're blaming it on this population. It seems, again, this is from my limited vantage point, it seems like they're sort of being kind of scapegoated as the cause of the rise in homelessness. I think that my theory would be that the rise in homelessness is also being directly like homegrown. There's homegrown homelessness rising that is not being talked about largely. And so I'm just wondering if my fellow panelists would agree with that, or if there's something I'm missing. I don't have the perspective that you all have. I'm more sort of down a level or two. So I'd love to hear what you guys think or what you guys are seeing.
Well, I could just say for NILAG, we have a tenants' rights unit, and they are housing attorneys, and I work with them when they lose their cases and their clients need to go into the shelter system. And for a very long time, no one was getting evicted, and then people started getting evicted again. So that may be a reason if there is a rise in homelessness, but I bet Josh knows the answer to this question.
I don't think I do. I mean, we certainly see that there are a lot of issues in housing court in particular, in representation of people in housing court and getting people's rent paid by agencies. But eviction is a major, but not the only driver of who is. We look at it in terms of who is in the shelter beds, right? So that there are, putting aside the new arrivals, the evictions, domestic violence, and discharge from corrections are really the three main sources. And we have been pushing on all of those, even, obviously those were always issues on our agenda, but we have emphasized that throughout the last year and a half to say, that a bed is a bed is a bed, right? The reason that we're opening all these these giant tents and putting people in mail sorting facilities at JFK Airport and Brooklyn Cruise Terminal and all these places that the fire department just vacated is because we need more beds, and we could have more beds by either adding new shelters or by just moving people out of shelter and preventing people from coming into shelter in the first place. So I know that, we've had a huge benefit from having enhanced Section 8 vouchers that came out of the pandemic relief, and some attention to fixing the city's housing subsidies as a way to sort of help people get into permanent housing. But in the end, there's only so many apartments out there that are affordable, and that's really what's driving that part of the number of people coming into shelter and staying in shelter. So I think if you just look at evictions, we have a big problem. We don't have enough lawyers to represent everyone in housing court. We don't have enough, a lot of the New York City agencies are currently understaffed, so it makes it very difficult for them to do the things they need to do to solve a lot of eviction cases. Those are all, and affordability, this is not improved in any way in New York City, at least. So those are all huge factors. But the other drivers of, and at this point, there was a time for many years when eviction was the number one driver, and it isn't anymore. There was for a long time in the last administration, at least, their data was that DV was the number one cause of homelessness, and that was not even factoring in, the fact that they reduced evictions went down 40% in the last administration, which is mind-boggling. but even accounting for that, the number of DV cases actually grew, which is pretty scary. So there are a number of factors there. I have been becoming increasingly aware from working with Jamie about, the shortage of appropriate beds for youth. And I'm actually curious if you want to respond to this, Jamie, as to whether that's an indication of supply or demand, or are there more youth? I mean, what is going on?
Yeah, I mean, all the data, I guess, to name up front isn't great for young people, which I mentioned before, but even with the data that is available before this recent influx of folks coming from other countries, the numbers were increasing for young people experiencing homelessness. I think we saw a plateau during the pandemic, like a lot of systems, just because it was a pandemic. And I think we've seen a spike since then. And I think Josh named a lot of folks that are coming identifying as LGBTQIA, and always within the youth population, there's a significant overrepresentation of young people that identify as LGBTQIA. It's about 40%, or the overall youth population, depending on what research you're looking at, is about 7 to 10. So it's significantly higher. And what we know during the pandemic specifically is people, this charge to come inside, right? Be inside, that's where you're safe. It's where you stop the spread, right? All the messaging. And for young people, that meant going inside places where they couldn't be who they were, where they weren't safe, right? And so as things became more safe, pandemic-wise, we saw a spike, right, of young people coming, leaving their homes again, right, and accessing services. And I think one of the more alarming things is over the past few years, we've seen specifically an increase in minors in the youth homelessness system. And that is not good. New York City contractually creates a lower age floor for runaway and homeless youth of 16 years old. It's lower outside of New York City. And so, but we know just with 16 and 17-year-olds that have been trying to access services, those numbers are increasing. And I think, like Josh was naming, there's definitely things that the city could do to connect young people to permanent housing that they have not done. Young people are often othered just because they're under a different acronym than folks experiencing homelessness in the DHS system, making them ineligible currently for things like city vouchers, priority for a lot of permanent supportive housing. And so there was already a bottleneck, and especially as the system is kind of full at this point, right? When we talk about the young people that are newly arrived, they're not eligible for a lot of those things. So even if victory, right, is achieved in getting young people access to a lot of the resources that exist, that victory won't translate to people that don't have specific immigration status yet. And so, right, as the system fills up, we'll see even less young people successfully moving out into their own apartments. And yeah, there's been no commitment to bring more beds online. And so programs are just trying to do the best that they can.
Thank you. And with that, I think we should open it up for a few minutes of general discussion. And panelists, if there's a thing that you were hoping to be asked and nobody is asking you, feel free to ask each other or your own self and shine a spotlight on the thing you were hoping would come up, because that's how it will. Tiffany, I see your hand.
Thank you. Good morning. I have 3 quick questions. So one, I would like to know, one, if not canceling the Right to Shelter Act, then what? What else can be done in order to support New Yorkers and support the new arrivals? Like what can we do?
I'll go first. We've recommended a number of options that the city and state and federal government have, a lot of which they have started to do. So I mentioned doing real case management. I mean, that's something that is only just beginning to be implemented a year and a half into this. The state has a resettlement program that is just getting underway that's going to move thousands of households, hopefully, out of New York City into other counties in New York State. The city and the state and I think many of the advocates on this call pushed very hard for the federal government to expand people's ability to work. I mean, that's the major driver of all of this, is that we are admitting people into the United States and not allowing them to support themselves, at least for an extended period of time while they wait for paperwork to be processed. So the city, the federal government extended TPS for Venezuelans, for instance, and so those applications are getting filed now. That will enable people to work. They are expediting work authorization for people who are eligible to apply for it already, and so people are now, we ran these clinics where over 1,700 households got work authorizations processed. So those people are starting to get their work authorization. So those kinds of things could make a huge difference. Will make a huge difference as we see going forward. And also, there are just better ways that the city could be communicating with people to who haven't come here yet, so they understand the reality of what's going on in New York. I think that would make a difference. As I mentioned, there are a significant number of people who are crossing the border with no expectation of where they're going, who get funneled to New York. But if they had better information about, sort of what it's like here versus other places that they might go, they might not be coming here. And we think that's an important piece of this too, is to make sure people have realistic information rather than just sort of blindly showing up here because they've been guided here. Those things would make a huge difference, and we see that they are beginning to make a difference. Recently, we saw for the first time the number of people leaving the system was greater than the number of people arriving. So that tells you that there's work that can be done to sort of reroute people, whether they're here or haven't gotten here yet. That would really make a huge difference. But I also would ask, what is the alternative? The alternative, if we don't have the right to shelter, we're still going to have lots of people coming, and we're going to have lots of people sleeping on the street. So that doesn't really seem like a solution either. What we need to do is get all of these levels of government working together to help people support themselves in a place where they, can be stable. And certainly there are communities all over the state and all over the country that are, have labor shortages, have declining school enrollment, and need kids. There are a lot of places that would welcome people, and we just need to get them the right supports to help them do that.
Josh, I have a question, 2 questions about what you just said, just to clarify. When you said more people are leaving the system than entering it, is that DHS or is that the HERC system?
That's, I think, new arrivals measured across all of the different agencies that are currently sheltering them. Okay.
And do you think it's maybe part of the reason they're leaving is because of the 30-day notices?
100%. But the city reports that 80% of the people who get those notices don't come in and ask for a second placement. Some number of those people don't understand what they were supposed to do. I mean, in the last couple of weeks, the city set up a new secret reapplication system, didn't tell anyone, didn't tell their own staff how it was supposed to work. And that led to mass confusion and a lot of people wandering around and people sleeping outside because they just couldn't get a straight answer about where they were supposed to be. So, it's probably not 80% is probably a greater number than it should be, but, a significant number of people are moving on. Some people have told us that they're leaving because it just got cold. I mean, they had never been in this kind of cold and they don't like it. I don't know how to measure how many people that is, but we're certainly going to see people leaving either because, again, they've gotten their work authorization, or they've managed to network with somebody who, has a better idea about where they can get work, or they tried working here, renting a delivery account and renting a bike, and that, they discovered that you earn dollars a day when you do that. Like, it's not viable. And so they're moving on to some other place. I think there are many reasons why people are moving on, but it's some combination of, being misdirected, getting bad information, and having a better idea.
And Josh, I do want to say thank you so much for answering that. But I was specifically speaking to what type of like legislation or any type of act, or that's really what I was like focused on, and not and your recommendations. Yes, I know the city already has began to implement some of those programmatic type things, but I was speaking about like any type of legislation, or is there something that we can do in that regard? Sorry if I wasn't clear.
Oh, okay. You mean to preserve the right to shelter?
Preserve it. If it is the right to shelter is what we need, if it's not the right to shelter, what I'm asking is, you're saying you're fighting against getting rid of that. My question is, if we're not going to use the right to shelter as a tool to help I think find balance right now, because right now New York City is a little in flux, right? So I think what is happening is that they're trying to find balance. I'm not saying it's the right answer. What I'm asking you, if we're not going to use that law, right, or that policy or legislation, is there another piece of legislation or something that we can use in order to help regain some type of balance among the city where as it is currently?
I think the mayor is right that we need more help from the federal government. They could solve this problem. They could get people work authorization. They have a number of tools for doing that. I think people have sort of given up on the idea that Congress is going to solve this, which is probably right. But there are tools that the president could do himself that would be a huge help. And the state also has a significant tools available to them to be relocating people. Like, it's very frustrating how slowly it's going, getting people who even the state agreed to move to other places. So, and then, the city has could be focusing on both preventing people from coming into the regular shelter system and moving those people out. That would also create a lot of space that would help take the pressure off. If the numbers were going down, we wouldn't be having this conversation. If people could work, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So it seems like those are the kinds of things we need to do. If we can reduce the strain on the shelter system in any way, by diverting any group of people, or if we can help more people get work, we will see that the problem takes care of itself, really. And so those are the kinds of things I think where we need to be investing resources. The city in particular, well, all three levels really. The president doesn't want to do anything because he doesn't want to be accused of helping immigrants in his reelection. He thinks that's going to be bad for him. The governor doesn't want to spend any more money. She just is not interested, it seems like. And the mayor also, is talking about budget cutbacks all the time. Like, wants to has been cutting agency budgets since he started, even before this. So we've ended up in a place where city agencies can't do their jobs. If we could, invest in those agencies and programs that already exist, I think we would see that people we would be able to get people the things that they need to take care of themselves. And then we would not need, to be having all these fights about, like, where are we going to put another tent?
Thank you.
And Tiffany, thank you for that question.
Do you think I could add something to that answer? There is a way, and I think what Josh was just speaking about, which is this is only considered to be like an emergency or a crisis because of the amount of people sort of that were already in shelter, right? And the lack of people getting them out. City Council has passed legislation to provide greater rental subsidies. And rental subsidies are a proven way to move people through the shelter system and onto permanent housing, and also a cheaper way to house people and a more stable way to house people. And so the city implementing these new rental subsidy laws, would be a really great way to move people out of the shelter system, to make room in the shelter system, and to not have, this overflow situation.
Thank you so much. And my last thought, and I won't ask my third question, but just like you all mentioned, thank you so much for that, Deb. They're setting up tents in like Floyd Bennett Field and all these legislators. Everyone is upset. Everyone's in uproar. People are just angry. But something that Josh stated that we do have current things in place. What about the armories or what about unused spaces? Are we tapping into those? Not necessarily the hotels and things of that sort, but there are unused spaces in the city. Have we tapped into all of the unused spaces?
I mean, I know that the city had asked the city had asked the state and the federal government for specific places that they wanted to use. The federal government said yes, and the state said no. So there definitely are locations. I mean, for instance, the Javits Center. Like, why aren't we using the Javits Center? There are a lot of places that could be available to provide space for people that that the governor does not want the city to use for whatever reason, which is very frustrating.
I'm going to rudely interrupt the conversation and ask Zach how we're doing for time.
Maybe one more question, and then we can wrap up. Just to be honest on the time.
Okay.
And thank you all very much. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody have another question?
Can I ask? And I am someone who tries to follow this, but there's constant updates. What's the current process? What's the current structure to include welcome centers and respite centers and PERTs and reticketing centers? And as someone arrives, is there a known process to the panel that work on this every day? That I'm sure is even more hard to follow for the folks that need that system. But do you understand what the current system is as someone comes to New York City?
I can.
You mean where do they go when they arrive?
Well, I mean, I understand that as the Welcome Center at the Roosevelt, but from there, what are the many routes that people are forced to take?
Go ahead, Jamie.
I mean, I think the fact that you're asking the question speaks so volumes, right? I think that the process is unclear. And as Josh said, it's always been a little unclear and it's always changing, and folks aren't made aware, staff aren't made aware, agencies aren't made aware. And I know, at least for young people, the only information we ever receive, including the city contracted providers regarding what the process is and how it's changing, is from the legal aid society, because we have yet to actually get government to step up to support and explain and give providers the resources and the information that they need so that young people are given the correct processes. And so I think, like I named before, I think some of the answers just lie in better communication and a more holistic approach to this. There's answers and there's people doing amazing work, and they're not getting the funding, right? The funding is going to people that aren't getting amazing work, and we need more money. Absolutely, that's number one. But there's also a lot of things that could be happening that the mayor and the city have complete control over that they're refusing to do because their messaging continues to be, the governor's not paying us, the federal government's not paying us, it's their problem, and not acknowledging what problems actually exist that could be fixed here very easily if they just engaged in collaborative communication with individuals that are doing this work.
Thank you. I see in the chat that Alana Trinello has asked a really good question. If the panel can see that, otherwise you'll have to listen to me reading it aloud. And I like that he's rejecting blame assigned to new immigrants for those cuts. But do you all see the question?
Yeah, I'll just say that, from the second that people started to turn up, last spring, year and a half ago, the mayor was talking about how this was going to mean that there were going to have to be cuts to city agencies. And so I think that agenda is not driven by this situation at all. And it is, just a classic situation of somebody who wants to cut services and reduce the role of the city in people's everyday life. And I think we oppose that. So support any efforts to defend those agencies and their budgets.
Can I offer a universal moment of encouragement to everybody on the call? I think a really great first step is one we're taking right now for a lot of these questions. Where are the numbers for homeless youth? What is the pathway? What are the pathways for someone who's just arriving and needs a place to stay? Is for us to start by talking, which is what we're doing. And those of us in our various sectors have learned the hard way that a paucity of good shareable data always impedes the work. And so the more we talk to each other, the more we share, the better things go for the populations that we serve, and for our own emotional well-being as we try to engage in the work. So this is good. And VOAD we have government partners who are on the call and routinely on the call. We have people from who mostly are focused on food insecurity and hunger. We have people who are mostly focused on sheltering. We have people who are mostly focused on this and that and the next thing. And we're all here because we're all engaged in crisis humanitarianism and dealing with disasters and their long-term recovery or immediate response of one sort or another. And so keep coming back. Let's keep talking to each other. And we did it with food numbers in COVID. We can apply the same mentality and spirit to what we need to do around homelessness in our city, I think. Zachary.
Yeah, thanks so much, Richard. Thanks, Jamie, Josh, Deb, Josiah. I'm almost 20 years into being part of this network, and I've wanted for us to have a conversation about the disaster of homelessness in New York City for some years. And so I'm grateful that you all brought that to our network this morning, and I hope, as Richard says, that's just the first conversation. So thanks so much. I'll just say we will be, as is our tradition, skipping a meeting in December as our sector gets pretty busy in the month. But please look for emails from us for upcoming meetings in the new year. Again, grateful to all that joined. We'll see you on the next one. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for coming, and thanks again to the panel. Brilliant people.
Yeah. Thank you. Happy holidays.
And also with you.